Hello, this is Mashit and Smash It, but you can call me Mash or Mash It for short. Remember Fleischer Studios? If you watched my review of their Gulliver's Travels movie, you should know at least a little about them. But for those of you who didn't, I'll try to sum it up as briefly as I can. They were responsible for a number of iconic cartoons like Popeye, Betty Boop, and Out of the Inkwell. And unlike Disney, who focused on enchanting its audience with family-friendly lightheartedness and warm fuzzies, Fleischer was more focused on crazy slapstick and some occasional raunchiness. They pretty much existed as Disney's opposite, serving as their first major rival in the animation business, before Warner Brothers took their place for a while. Also, their animation style may have been the primary inspiration for the recent hit video game, Cuphead. Of course, Disney was surely part of it as well. Unfortunately, their time as a force in the animation world was not to last, as in 1942, the studio became defunct due to the falling profits in the wake of World War II, as well as rising tensions leading to subsequent splitting between the two Fleischer brothers. Soon they were forced to surrender their intellectual property to their owner company, Paramount Pictures. And one of the very last hurrahs in their relatively short history is their second and unfortunately last animated feature film, Mr. Bug Goes to Town, aka Hoppity Goes to Town in the UK, aka Bugville as of later releases. Now you know this movie's gonna be interesting if they can't even settle on a title. I guess everyone's copy is different, though I'll go with Mr. Bug since that's the title that appeared on the copy I watched and will be using clips from. This movie was released on December 5th, 1941, just 2 days before the attack on Pearl Harbor, which resulted in America's involvement in World War II. This was surely a major reason why the movie tanked as badly as it did. Disney was obviously hit by this pretty hard as well, leading to a series of package films for the remainder of the decade, though unlike Fleischer, they were able to roll with the punches and soon made a nice recovery in the 50s. And if modern times are anything to go by, things worked out for them in the end. Fleischer Studios, not so much. Mr. Bug is probably even more under the radar of animation fans than Gulliver's Travels is. And honestly, aside from all the circumstances surrounding its release, I can see why. The movie focuses on Hoppity the Grasshopper, who returns to his hometown in the Lowlands, a village of insects next to a house in Manhattan, New York. Unfortunately, he finds his old home undergoing hard times due to the fence that separates them from the danger of humans being broken. As he tries to find a solution to their predicament, the town's resident rich jerk, C. Bagley Beetle, tries to win the hand of Hoppity's girlfriend, Honey Bumble, to marry him. After trying and failing to move all the bugs to a new home, it's up to Hoppity to set things right. So yeah, the plot is pretty paint by numbers, and was in fact loosely based on a poem called The Life of the Bee by Maurice Maeterlinck, which they originally wanted to adapt directly, but couldn't obtain the rights. So I guess that would have made this the B movie before B movie. Instead, they made the cast a variety of insects because all bugs matter. I don't even have a political point to make, I just felt like saying that. The animation is slightly better than it was in Gulliver's Travels, though certainly not anything amazing. For instance, it made enough sense to rotoscope the humans like they did with Gulliver, and they made the right call by keeping their faces hidden lest they have more uncanny valley effects. Also, it makes sense from the character's perspective. But because of this, there's just less to show off now, making this quite possibly the least visually groundbreaking or interesting movie I've looked at so far. The world is also very small, even for a movie focusing on insects. It's pretty much just a small bug village, a pretty little house that two nice humans live in, and the skyscraper that replaces it. And that's pretty much it. Also, this movie has quite easily the blandest cast of characters I've covered so far. Hoppity may have appealed to some demographic back in the day, but now he's an obnoxious and boring goody two-shoes protagonist with an annoying voice and even more annoying catchphrase.
Gee whiz! Oh, gee whiz! Gee whiz! Gee whiz! Oh, gee whiz! Oh, gee whiz!
Then we have the block of wood that is the love interest, the annoying Bee Scout that I would almost assume is her little brother, and Mr. Creeper, who is essentially Grumpy from Snow White as a snail. Don't believe me? Pinto Colvig, Grumpy's voice actor, who also voiced characters like Goofy and even Gabby in Fleischer's last movie, is the voice actor for Creeper, and he essentially reprises the voice he did for Grumpy.
And don't forget I told you so.
In fact, you might even hear a voice or two that sounds like Goofy in this movie, as well as Fleischer's other regular voice actors. Most of the other characters, well, they exist. There's practically nothing to say about the vast majority of this cast, and very little to say about the rest of them. Most of them don't even have anything to contribute to this story. The only characters who are even slightly interesting are Mr. Bumble and the villains. The former just because of his overall humble presence, with some occasional traces of attitude, and the latter due to being given the most consistent comedic scenes and some minor charisma. Granted, the villains are also very cliché, though to be fair, this is the first movie I've seen in my retrospective that has villains like this. Some other villains might have shown hints of this in earlier movies like Gulliver and Pinocchio, but I think this may be the first of what is sure to be many animated movies that has the ever-so-classic chemistry of the bumbling henchman duo working for the abusive mastermind. Also, there are surely plenty of villains to come that have at least some aspects of Mr. Beetle's persona. So yeah, for all the future animated films over the years with uninspired villains, they have Mr. Bug Goes to Town to thank. As if this movie didn't have enough factors working against it. And due to the lack of characters to latch onto or an inspired story, I just didn't care about anything that was going on in this movie. Things got a little interesting near the end, with tensions rising as the villain has the hero trapped after the latter found out about the former's plot. I actually was starting to wonder how this whole situation was going to be resolved. And then comes the big slap in the face as things then go even more south. While I was still wondering how things could possibly be resolved, it just got increasingly ridiculous during the climax, to the point that by the time they pull the big contrived resolution out of their butts at the end, none of it felt rewarding. The payoff just wasn't worth it, and there was no big satisfactory moment like the villain getting a fitting enough comeuppance. And due to the characters surviving all sorts of slapstick abuse, the stakes are just too high and yet non-existent at the same time. Even the most shameless, lowest common denominator cash grabs released in our modern era at least know the basics of high stakes and satisfying rewards, even if they don't always pull it off. Also, there's a lot of racial visual humor in this movie. You know, if this kind of stuff offends you, I feel ya, but what really annoys me about this is just the overall cockiness behind it. Like, oh, putting on blackface always knocks him dead, so let's just do it without any point to it. These kinds of jokes back then are like fart jokes today, except fart jokes will still be acceptable in 50 years or so, for better or worse. At least when shows like South Park and Family Guy do racial jokes, there's a point to them. This is just being offensive for the sake of being offensive, without even knowing that it is offensive. I know times were different back then, but I just hate this kind of pretense in certain kinds of humor, even with jokes that are still common today. And then we have the songs, which are at best forgettable and at worst annoyingly dated. I wasn't a big fan of the songs from Gulliver either, but they were still at least a little more memorable and catchy. The songs from that movie haven't aged so well either, but here there is just an extra layer of toothless jazz and overly chipper ballads that just don't hold up today. There's still some level of catchiness to the songs, but it's mostly the annoying kind of catchy. The only song I'm willing to give some credit to is We're the Couple in the Castle. It's nice. Not great, just nice. This was the least interesting movie I've looked at so far. Hardly anything about it is worth watching, and even the better stuff it has to offer tends to lead to further problems. The main charm it has that might appeal to some people is its Fleischer-ness. Otherwise, this one's a definite skip, and I don't care to see it again. I'm giving Mr. Bug Goes to Town a 4 out of 10. Though while it may have the same rating as Princess Iron Fan, I'll definitely take this movie's blandness over having my eyes and ears constantly assaulted, so Iron Fan is still a fair bit worse. But it really is quite tragic. While Fleischer's style may not have been for everyone, there was still a charm to it that could have endured for many years. Sure, they probably never would have reached the level of Disney success. At this point in time, Disney's weakest movie was still a fair bit superior to Fleischer's strongest, where the latter was a legitimate attempt to compete with their rival, and the former was just an afterthought made specifically to make back some badly needed money. But I could totally picture Fleischer having continued to appeal to a niche market. I mean, Popeye is still a pretty popular character for a reason. I guess the lesson to take away from this is, if you're an ambitious artist of any kind, whether it be writing, drawing, animating, or the like, it's best to think before giving up the rights to your brainchildren to big companies. Sometimes it works out. Franchises like Star Wars and the Marvel Cinematic Universe seem to be more successful than ever after Disney bought them out, though I guess how they'll do in the long run is yet to be seen. But if you invest your property with someone who doesn't have the same vision as you do, your own vision might be lost along the way, and that will be yet another example of art being defeated by business. Food for thought. This is Mash It and Smash It, signing off.